Serena and Alexis, a love story, written by Barron Darby, narration by Jessica Ann Bogart, prologue, The Hotel in Rome. If you have arrived at this book by way of a tennis match, I will tell you something the tennis match did not show you. Behind every long return, behind every line called and every line questioned, behind the shoulders that the cameras have followed for 30 years, across every major court on this earth, there is a kitchen. There is a kitchen with 2 daughters in it now. There is a kitchen with a husband at the counter, slicing an apple, listening to a podcast on his earbuds the way he was listening to one the morning he met her. 12 years and 1 ocean and 1 whole second life ago. Begin in May of 2015 in Rome on a quiet morning at the Cavalieri Hotel. The pool sat on a hill above the city. The breakfast room smelled like coffee. A young woman from Compton, California, who had won 20 Grand Slam titles by then and was preparing for 1 more, sat at a long table with her agent and a friend, eating fruit, planning the rest of her week. A young man from Brooklyn by way of Maryland, who had built one of the largest websites in the world, sat down at the table next to hers without noticing who she was. He had his earbuds in. He was working. She did not know him. He did not know her. For about 20 minutes that morning, they were just 2 strangers at adjacent tables in a hotel in a foreign city, the way most love stories begin, and most love stories end, and most love stories never finish the sentence at all. I will tell you what happened next. She tried to scare him off. She told him there was a rat under his table. He looked at her. He did not move. He told her later he had grown up in New York City, where rats are an accepted condition of living, and that the announcement of one had not, in his case, been the universal repellent the announcement of one usually was. He kept eating. He waited. He let her come to him. That is the first thing I want you to know about this man. He is not, in his bones, a man who chases. He is a man who builds. He builds a website. He builds a venture firm. He builds a soccer club, eventually, on the other side of the world, with a friend he met because of her. He builds, in the way patient people build, a place where the woman he is going to love can sit down and rest. He let her come to him. She did. She invited him to Paris, 2 weeks later, to watch her play the French Open. He went. He has never stopped going. I will tell you what came before that morning. She had been a girl in Compton with a father who had taught himself tennis from books and videos so that he could teach his daughters. She had been a younger sister to Venus, who was the older one, and the one the world saw first. She had been a young woman who lost her oldest sister to gun violence on a street in their hometown when she was 21 years old. She had been an athlete who had returned, after that loss, to the only place that ever told her how to grieve, which was the court. She had been a champion, 20 Grand Slams over by the time she sat down at that table in Rome. She had been also single. She had been single for a long time. He had been a boy in Brooklyn with an Armenian father whose people had walked out of the genocide carrying their alphabet, and a German mother who had come to America at 23 on an au pair visa for love. He had been raised in a leafy suburb in Maryland called Columbia, where the kindness of a public school education had introduced him to the boy who would become his best friend, and they had eventually built a website together in a coffee shop in Charlottesville, Virginia, and that website would change the shape of the internet. He had also lost his mother, slowly, to a cancer that she had carried into her final months while he sat with her and watched her go. He had been, by that morning in Rome, a young widower of his mother. He had been single, too. There is a hard middle of this story. There always is. The hard middle of this one runs through the first hours after the birth of their first daughter, in September of 2017, in West Palm Beach, Florida, in a hospital where the woman who had won 23 Grand Slams nearly died from a pulmonary embolism that almost was not caught because the people in front of her did not believe what she was telling them about her own body. He was there. He stayed. He has told the story since, when she has asked him to tell it, in the same plain words she uses when she tells it. 6 surgeries, bed rest for the better part of 2 months, a baby in the hospital, a wife in the hospital, a husband at the foot of 2 beds, doing what husbands do when there is nothing to do, praying, pacing, be there. I will tell you the name of the daughter, Olympia. She was named for the city in Greece where the Olympic Games began, and for the sound her father said it made when you laid it on a tongue. She arrived in September. Her parents married each other in a Beauty and the Beast-themed wedding in New Orleans 2 months later, in the Contemporary Arts Center, with tables named for her mother's Grand Slam victories and a bouquet of white roses in her mother's hands. In 2022, the woman in this story announced, in a Vogue essay she wrote herself, that she was evolving away from tennis. The word was hers. She did not call it retirement. She called it evolution. She wanted, she wrote, more children. She wanted to build her venture firm. She wanted to stop missing the small Tuesdays of her daughter's life. In August of 2023, she walked the steps of the Met Gala in a Gucci gown that announced, in advance of any caption, that there was a second daughter coming. They named her Adira River. The middle name was the sound of a thing that keeps moving. What follows in this audiobook is the story of how a tennis player from Compton and an entrepreneur from Brooklyn met on a hotel terrace in Rome, fell in love by way of a rat that did not exist, and built a marriage in the public eye without letting the public eye define it. The dialogue inside this book is imagined the way a good story imagines dialogue. The events inside it are not. The events inside it are the public record of a marriage dramatized with care in honor of 2 people who have built a household that is now, at the time of this writing, full of 2 daughters, 2 laptops, 1 tennis racket kept under a couch, the way some people keep an old sword, and a number of dogs. There will be a hotel in Rome. There will be a French Open. There will be a hospital room. There will be a Met Gala. There will be a kitchen. Their names are Serena and Alexis. This is their love story. Part 1. Before. Chapter 1. Serena, Compton, 1981 to 1990. I was born on a Saturday afternoon in late September of 1981 in Saginaw, Michigan, the youngest of 5 girls. By the time my memory begins, my mother and father had moved us to Compton, California, and the world I came up inside of was a world of cracked tennis courts, hot asphalt, and a father who carried a tennis ball can on every walk we took, the way other fathers in our neighborhood carried keys. My father's name is Richard. He was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, the way many men of his generation in our community were born, with a name and a refusal. He had left the South for California with nothing in his pockets but a plan, and the plan was tennis. He had read every tennis book he could find. He had watched every tennis match he could record. He had decided, before any of his daughters could speak, that two of them would become the best tennis players the sport had ever seen, and the rest of his decisions had been arranged in service of that one. My mother, or Racine, was a nurse. She carried a steadiness through our house that Richard did not. She read scripture. She fed the five of us. She made sure that when my father's plan needed pushback, the pushback came. I had 4 older sisters. Yatunde was the oldest. Lindria and Isha came after her. Venus was a year and 3 months ahead of me. The 5 of us made our beds in 2 rooms. We made our breakfasts in the same kitchen. We took our lessons together. My father had set up a court in the parking lot of a public lot near our home. And on every morning that I can remember from my early childhood, the sun came up over the cars and over the chain-link fence and over my father, who was already there, dragging a basket of 200 yellow tennis balls onto the court, like a man dragging a sled. I was 3 years old when he put a racket in my hand. I do not say that for color. I am being precise. There is a video, somewhere, of me at 3, and the racket is bigger than my torso, and I am holding it with both hands the way a woodcutter holds an axe. I am hitting the ball back to him over and over, because that is what my father wanted, and because, even at 3, the love I had for him was the love of a daughter who would break herself in half to do the thing the man at the other end of the court was asking her to do. I will tell you something about my father that the world has gotten partly right and partly wrong. He was, on his hardest days, a hard man. He had a voice you could hear from 3 courts away. He had opinions you could hear from a mile away. He believed, in a way that most American fathers of black daughters of his generation could not afford to believe, that his daughters were going to win, not someday, not maybe, win. He drilled it into us the way other fathers drill scripture into their children. We were not going to be good. We were going to be the best. He told us so on the way to the court. He told us so in the car on the way home from the court. He told us so at the dinner table. He told us so when he tucked me in. What the world did not always see, because the world was busy reading my father as a character, was the gentleness underneath the strategy. He never raised a hand against any of his daughters, not one. He had built, in our house, a fortress of expectation around 5 girls, and inside the fortress he was the watchman. He stood at the gate. He watched the road. He watched the news. He paid attention to the kind of attention a black girl gets when she is the youngest one walking home from a public court in Compton at the close of the afternoon. He paid attention. He was paying attention all of the time. My mother prayed. My father planned. The 2 of them between them raised 5 girls, and the 2 of them between them taught me what a man and a woman can do when they decide to do a hard thing in the same direction. I have said in interviews that Compton was rough. It was. The 80s in Compton were not a metaphor. There were sirens. There were nights when our father took us off the court an hour early, and we knew not to ask why. There were friends of ours who did not make it to high school. There were evenings when my mother set the table and waited a long time for my father to come home. And there were evenings when the table was set, and we ate quietly because our father was already asleep on the couch in his work boots from the security shift he had taken to keep the lights on. Compton was also, in a way the world has never wanted to give it credit for, a great teacher of love. The neighbors knew us by name. The corner store man saved a Snickers under the counter for me. The barbers on Rosecrans gave my father a discount because they knew the plan. The girls down the block came to my parents' house for the meals my mother made on Sundays. Compton was rough because the country was rough. Compton was loving because the people in it had decided to love each other anyway. I learned on Compton corners that love is hard. I learned that love is worth it. I would not then have known how to say the third part. I learned it later. Love stays. When I was 9, our family moved to West Palm Beach, Florida, because my father had found a coach who would take Venus and me into his academy without charging. The coach was named Rick Maxey. The academy was on a tennis campus. We did not go to a regular school anymore. My father homeschooled us in the morning. The afternoons belonged to the courts. I left Compton at the age of 9, but Compton did not leave me. The shoulders I built in Compton were the shoulders I would carry every match I ever played, in every country I ever flew to, on every center court that ever spoke my name. The strip of asphalt my father had drawn the lines on with chalk the day my mother was at her shift was the first court I ever loved. It is the court I still close my eyes and see when a match is going badly, and I need to remember why I picked up the racket at 3. That was where I started. Chapter 2. Alexis, Brooklyn, 1983 to 1996. I was born on a spring morning in April of 1983 in Brooklyn, New York, in a hospital that I have driven past many times since and never parked at. My mother's name was Anki. She had come to the United States at 23 years old from Germany on an au pair visa with an English vocabulary that would have fit in a small notebook. She met my father within a year of arriving. She married him. She got a green card. She kept the green card for a decade before she became a citizen. And on the day she became a citizen, my father drove her to the post office and bought her flowers. My father's name is Chris. He is Armenian. His grandparents had walked on foot out of 2 Armenian villages called Bitlis and Karput during the genocide of 1915, and they had come eventually to upstate New York, and they had built a small life in Binghamton, and my father had grown up in San Francisco and become a travel agent, and met my mother by way of a friend in Brooklyn. That is the short version of how I came to be standing on this earth. The long version requires 3 continents, 2 genocides, and 1 au pair visa. Most love stories do. I want you to understand before this audiobook goes any further what kind of household I was raised in. My great aunt on my father's side was named Vera. She had been a small girl in Bitlis when the Ottoman soldiers came. She had survived the way small girls survived. She had watched things you and I will never have to watch. She had come to America. She had built a life. When I was a small boy, Vera pulled me into a kitchen one afternoon and told me, in her direct old country voice, what it meant to be Armenian. I remember the kitchen. I remember her hand on my shoulder. I remember that she told me we had been almost killed, and we had not been killed, and that the work of my life, whatever it would turn out to be, was to be worthy of the thing my great-grandparents had walked out of the desert to save. I have, since that afternoon in Vera's kitchen, tried to live in a way that would not embarrass her. I do not always succeed. I will not pretend that I always succeed. I will tell you that on every important morning of my life, including the morning I sat in a hospital next to my own German mother, as she went, slowly and with grace, through the late stages of the cancer that took her, I have heard Vera's voice in my ear. Be worthy. We moved from Brooklyn to Columbia, Maryland. when I was a small boy. Columbia is a planned community on the corridor between Washington and Baltimore. The houses had backyards. The schools were good. The streets had been laid out 50 years before I lived on them by a man named James Rouse, who had wanted to build a place where black families and white families and Asian families and Jewish families could be neighbors. By the time I lived in Columbia, the experiment had taken root, the way experiments root, imperfectly but persistently, and my middle school cafeteria did not look like the middle school cafeterias I had seen in movies. I had a best friend named Steve in middle school who would 6 years later sit at a coffee shop table with me in Charlottesville and dream up the website that would eventually become the front page of the internet. In high school, I was a tall, awkward kid with a thick head of hair and a face that was still figuring out where its angles wanted to be. I played video games. I did community service. I had one girlfriend in high school. She broke up with me on the day I got accepted to the University of Virginia. I cried in the car. My mother sat with me in the driveway. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, in her German accent that had never quite gone away, that the right girl was not going to have to break up with me to show me she was the wrong girl. I have told that story since. It is one of the truest things my mother ever said to me. I went to Charlottesville. I studied history and commerce. I was, in the words of a professor I had, a quietly stubborn young man, which I think was a polite way of saying I had ideas I was not yet ready to defend. I met Steve again in a residence hall. We were assigned to the same dorm. We started building things together on a laptop. We applied to a summer accelerator program in Boston the spring of our senior year. The accelerator was called Y Combinator. The first idea we pitched got rejected. The second idea, the one we drew on a napkin in a diner on Route 1 during the drive back to Charlottesville, became Reddit. I want you to know what I was at 22 years old before this story goes any further. I was a young man with one big idea, no money, a German mother and an Armenian father, a great-aunt's voice in my ear, a best friend who had stuck with me through the worst pitch I had ever given, and an absolute conviction that the internet was going to be where the world's conversation lived. I was right about the conversation. I was wrong about how kind the conversation would always be. I would spend the next 20 years of my life trying to fix what we had started. I was also, at 22 years old, in love with the idea of being in love, and almost entirely unprepared for the actual woman who would, 12 years later, sit down at a hotel terrace in Rome and tell me that there was a rat under my table. That was where I started. Chapter 3, Serena, Florida, and the World, 1990 to 2002. By the time I was 12 years old, I was beating women on the satellite circuit who were old enough to be my older sister. By the time I was 14, I had turned professional. The decision to turn pro had been made by my father, with my mother's reluctant agreement, and I had stood in a small press conference in a small ballroom in Florida and read a statement that my father had helped me write. I do not remember what I wore. I remember that my mother was in the room. I remember that Venus was in the room. I remember that the photographers were calling my name, and that the way they called it was different from the way the photographers had called Venus's name a year earlier. It was the same name. It was a different way of saying it. The thing nobody tells you about turning professional at 14 is the part where you go home from the press conference and have to do your homework. My father was a strict homeschool teacher. He wanted me to study biology. He wanted me to study American history. He wanted me to learn the names of the senators of the state of California. He believed that the racket was a vocation, and that the mind was a separate vocation, and that one was not allowed to make excuses for the other. I had my first Grand Slam victory at the United States Open in 1999. I was 17 years old. I had played a final against Martina Hingis and won in straight sets. The trophy was so heavy I had to hold it with both hands. My mother was in the player's box. My father was not. He had stayed home that night in Florida, watching on television. I have asked him since, more than once, why he had not come, and he has told me more than once that he could not stand to watch his daughters lose a match in person. He has told me, less often, that he knew I would win, and that what he wanted to do that night, with my mother gone to New York, was sit alone in our house and let himself cry the way fathers cry when their daughters do the thing the fathers prayed for. I won at Wimbledon 2 years later. I won at the French Open. I won at the Australian. I won every Grand Slam in a single calendar year between 2002 and 2003, and they called it the Serena Slam because nobody had won them all in a row that way since, with a few storied exceptions, the longest ago part of the sport. I was 21 years old. I was also, at 21 years old, sometime in 2003, sitting in a kitchen in Compton with my mother, and the kitchen had on it a phone, and the phone rang, and the news on the other end of the phone was that my oldest sister Yetunde had been killed. I will not put on the page what came next. The detail belongs to Yetunde, and to my mother, and to Venus, and to my father, and to the 3 children Yetunde left behind. I will tell you that the year that followed was the year my career interrupted itself. I will tell you that the only place I knew how to grieve in was on a court, and that I hit a tennis ball, alone, every day after she died, the way some people pray. I will tell you that at the funeral, my father did not speak. I will tell you that my mother was the woman who held all of us upright. I will tell you that when I returned to a tournament 8 months later, the first match I played was not a match I won. I lost in the first round. I went back to the locker room. I sat on the bench. I cried. Then I went out the next day and I served. The court did its job. The court has always done its job. I tell you this because no story of how I came to love Alexis Ohanian makes any sense without telling you that I had been a sister long before I was a wife. The sister I had been before Yetunde died had not died with her, but she had grown up that year. The sister I would be for the rest of my life would carry her in every match. She is the reason there are letters on the inside of one of my wristbands that I will not put on the page because they belong to her and to me and not to the listener. By the time I was 25, I had 13 Grand Slams. I had also, by then, lost my way more than once, in the way young women in the public eye lose their way. I had broken up with men. I had been embarrassed in print by the speculations of the kind of magazines that speculate. I had, in the long quiet of my own apartment, asked God a lot of questions. I had received some of the answers. I had not yet received all of them. The one I had not yet received was the one about who I was going to spend the rest of my life with. I had a list. I will tell you what was on it. He had to be tall. He had to be funny. He had to be kind to my mother. He had to be the kind of man who, when he walked into a room, did not need the room to clap for him. He had to know how to be quiet with me. He had to know how to be loud with me when the moment called for loud. He had to love God, or at least respect mine. He had to want children. He had to be a man who had built something himself. I had been waiting for that man for a long time when, in May of 2015, in Rome, in the breakfast room of a hotel on a hill, I sat down at a table with my agent and my friend, and I noticed, 2 tables away, a tall, awkward man with a thick head of hair and earbuds in his ears, working on a laptop, alone. He looked to me like nothing in particular. That, I would learn later, was because he was not performing for the room. He was the only man in the room who was not performing for the room. He was eating his breakfast. I will tell you in the next chapter what I did about it. Chapter 4. Alexis, the Internet and a Mother, 1996 to 2014. The website Steve and I built in the summer of 2005 on the second floor of a small apartment in Medford, Massachusetts, was called Reddit. We had been told by Y Combinator's first cohort to make something people wanted. We had decided that what people wanted was a place to find the front page of the internet without having to know which front page to look at. We built a feed. We built voting. We built comments. We launched in June of 2005 with no users. By the end of the summer, we had a few thousand. By the end of the year, we had a few 100,000. By the next year, we had millions. I was 23 years old when Condé Nast bought our company. The check, when split between Steve and me and a third co-founder we had brought on, was the kind of check that changes the shape of a young man's life, if he lets it. I tried not to let it. I tried, in the first months, to act as if nothing had changed. I bought my mother a piano because she had wanted one for years and had not bought one for herself. I gave money to causes that mattered to me. I kept living in apartments my friends could afford to visit me in. I tried to be useful. I was also, for the first time in my life, alone, in a way that had a name. The girl I had been dating in college had moved on. My mother and father were a flight away. Steve had gone to live in Virginia. I sat in apartments I could now afford and stared at walls. I had become, in the language of the magazines that wrote about young men like me, a young millionaire. I had not become, in any of the ways that counted, a man. In 2011, my mother was diagnosed with brain cancer. My father called me in Brooklyn. I flew to Maryland that afternoon. I sat in a hospital room and held her hand. I had the same hand on me that she had laid on me on every important day of my life. The hand was thinner now. The grip was the same. She told me, in a German accent that had not gone away in 40 years, that she was not afraid. She told me that she had lived a life that was longer than her own mother had lived, and that her mother had been content with a shorter one, and that I should not, under any circumstances, let her sickness become the thing my life was about. She told me that I should keep building. She told me that I should keep making her laugh. She told me that I should, when the right woman walked into a room, recognize her without hesitation, because life was too short for hesitation. She died in 2013. I gave a eulogy. I do not remember most of it. I remember that I told the room that my mother had been the kind of woman who showed up. She had shown up at every soccer game. She had shown up at every birthday. She had shown up at the airport at midnight with a pot of soup. She had shown up. The word, when I said it, sounded like the right word. I have used it since. It is the word I tried, in the years that followed, to be in front of every person I loved. After my mother died, I started a venture firm with 2 partners. The firm was called Initialize Capital. We invested in young companies the way I had once been invested in by older men. I tried to be useful to the founders. I tried to be honest with them. I tried to give them the kind of advice my mother would have given them if my mother had been a venture capitalist and not a German immigrant who had wanted, more than anything, to be at peace with the idea that she had given her son a country. By 2015, I was 31 years old. I had built a company, I had buried my mother, I had a venture firm, I had a small condo in Brooklyn, I had no wife, I had no children. I had a half-finished book I was trying to write about how the internet could be a kinder place than it had become. And the half-finished book sat on my laptop, the way half-finished books sit on every writer's laptop, accusing the writer of something the writer cannot quite name. A friend of mine in the technology world had been invited to give a talk at a conference in Italy. He had asked me to come along. He had told me there would be good food, good wine, and a chance to think. I had said yes. I had packed a bag. I had flown into Rome. I had checked into the Cavalieri Hotel. I had gone to bed. I had woken up. I had come down to breakfast. I had sat at a table near the pool. I had put on my earbuds. I had opened my laptop. I had started working. A young woman at the table next to mine, whose face I did not at that moment recognize, leaned over with the kind of grin I would later come to understand was her grin, and she told me there was a rat under my table. I did not move. I did not flinch. I would tell her later, when this had become a story we told other people, that the announcement of a rat is, in Brooklyn, a Tuesday. I told her something else that morning in Italian because I was trying to be charming and my Italian was bad, and she laughed at me the way you laugh at a tall, awkward man who is trying. I asked her if she wanted to come sit at my table. She said no. I went back to my laptop. I waited. She came over eventually. She sat down. She asked me what I was working on. I told her. She asked me what my name was. I told her. She told me hers. I will tell you that I did not, in that moment, fully understand who she was. I will tell you that I had not, by the spring of 2015, been a tennis fan in the way a fan is a fan. I will tell you that I was wearing, on my wrist, a watch my mother had given me on my college graduation, which I have since worn on every important day of my life since. I will tell you that the woman across from me had a smile that had been on the cover of magazines I had not read, and that the smile she gave me that morning was not one she had given to a magazine. It was the smile a woman gives a man when she is interested in finding out who he is. I will tell you in the next chapter what I did about it. Part 2. Falling. Chapter 5. Serena, the Cavalieri, May 2015. I am going to tell you in this chapter the part of the story that has been told the most often, and that I want to tell you in my own way, because the way it has been told the most often makes me sound funnier than I was being and makes him sound stranger than he was being. The hotel was the Cavalieri. The hotel sits on a hill above Rome. From the breakfast room, you can see most of the city. The breakfast was good. My agent and my friend and I were sitting at a long table near the pool, eating fruit, planning the rest of our week. The Italian Open was about to begin. I had a press obligation in the afternoon. I wanted, before the obligation, to drink coffee in the sun and talk to my people. A tall man came down to breakfast with a rolling laptop bag and headphones around his neck, and he picked the table next to ours, and he sat down at it, and he put his headphones on, and he opened his laptop, and he started working. He was, in the way of men who are not trying to be looked at, the most looked at man at the pool that morning. He did not know it. That is part of what I noticed. The other part was the back of his head. He had a thick mess of hair. He had a long neck. He had a tan line where the headphones had been pressing against his skin. He had a quietness around him. My agent and my friend were, by then, cracking jokes about how I was supposed to scare him off so we could expand our table for the rest of my team. I picked up my joke. I leaned over. I told him, in my best stage voice, that there was a rat under his chair. He looked at me. He did not move. He said, in an accent I could not place, that he was from Brooklyn, and that the rats of his childhood were a kind of ambient feature of the city, and that I would have to do better. I laughed. The whole table laughed. He laughed back. He had a laugh that was bigger than his body. He looked, in that moment, like a man who did not know he was tall. He looked, in that moment, like a man who was going to be easy to talk to. I will tell you plainly what I felt. I felt the small shift in my stomach that I had not felt in maybe 2 years. It was not a thunderclap. I have never trusted thunderclaps. It was a shift. It was the way a kitchen shifts when somebody you have been waiting for, without quite knowing you were waiting, walks through the door. I told my agent, in the language we use between us, that I wanted him to come sit at our table. My agent invited him over. He came. He sat across from me. He shook my hand. He looked, when he shook my hand, at my face. He did not look at the rest of me. He did not look past my shoulder to see who else was at the breakfast room. He looked at my face. He smiled. He told me his name was Alexis. I told him mine. He nodded. I could not, at that moment, tell whether he knew what my name meant in the world, or whether he was the kind of man who genuinely had no idea. I would learn, in the days that followed, that it was a little of both. He knew, in the way a man who reads news online knows. He did not know, in the way a tennis fan knows. He had not been to a tennis match in his adult life. He had not, until he met me, ever been to the French Open. He had been busy building Reddit. We talked for 45 minutes that morning. I will not tell you what we talked about, because most of what we talked about was the kind of small thing two strangers talk about when they are figuring each other out. I will tell you that he told me, near the end of the conversation, that he was going to give a talk that night to some founders in Rome. I will tell you that I told him, with a casualness I had not felt for a long time, that I had a tournament starting and that I would be at the French Open the week after, and that he should come watch. He looked at me. He did not say yes immediately. He said he would think about it. I asked him for his number. I gave him mine. We walked out of the breakfast room separately. I went to the press obligation. I played my matches. I did not, every hour, check whether he had texted. I checked, occasionally. He did text. He was thoughtful. He asked questions that men do not always ask. He asked what my mother had named me after. I told him. He asked who Yetunde was. I told him. He listened. The week after Rome was the French Open. He flew to Paris. He came to my matches. He sat in my box. He did not, on any of the days he sat in my box, take a picture for himself or post one online or tell anybody outside our small circle that he was there. He sat there. He clapped at the right times. He stayed quiet at the right times. He, at the end of every day, walked back to the hotel with me, and we ate dinner, and we did not run out of things to say. I will tell you what happened on the third night. I told him I was falling for him. I said it in a hotel room. I said it because I was 23 grand slams into a career that did not, to a passerby, leave a lot of room for falling for somebody, and because I did not want to spend any more time being too careful for my own happiness. He looked at me. He told me he was falling for me too. He told me he had been falling for me, in his quiet way, since I had told him about the rat. We fell. We have never stopped falling. That is the secret of what people are calling our marriage. 10 years on from the breakfast room in Rome. We fell once and decided to keep falling. The decision is the work. The decision is the love. Chapter 6. Alexis, Paris, and the year after, 2015 to 2016. I am going to tell you in this chapter the part that the magazines have not told you. The magazines have told you about the rat. The magazines have told you about the French Open. The magazines have told you, in the breathless way magazines tell you, that the Reddit guy and the tennis champion fell in love. The magazines have not told you about the year between Paris and the engagement, because the year between Paris and the engagement was not for magazines. It was for two people figuring out whether the small shift in the kitchen was going to turn into a household. I will tell you what the year looked like. I flew. She flew. I work in a job that lets me work from anywhere. She works in a job that does not. She had to be on the court. She had to be on the plane. She had to be in the locker room at Wimbledon by a particular morning. I had to choose, every Sunday, whether the next week of my life was going to be a week in San Francisco at the office, or a week in a hotel room in a city I had never been to before. I chose the city. Almost every week, I chose the city because the woman I was falling for was in the city, and because the woman I was falling for had told me on the third night of the French Open that if I was going to be the man she had been waiting for, I was going to have to show up. She had said it lightly. She had also said it seriously. I had heard the seriousness. I had decided to live up to the seriousness. I learned in that year what tennis is. I had thought before that year that tennis was a sport. Tennis is not a sport. Tennis is a job. Tennis is a particular kind of grueling job that has, on top of the grueling, the particular cruelty that the better you are, the longer the season is. I learned to read draws. I learned what a seed was. I learned why it mattered which side of the bracket the second seed was on. I learned the names of her physiotherapists. I learned what a surface change does to her serve. I learned, at the foot of her hotel bed in Wimbledon, how to ice a shoulder. I also learned in that year what loss is in her body. I had lost my mother. I had not lost a match in front of 20,000 strangers, and then gone back to a hotel room with my new boyfriend and tried to be a normal woman in a normal hotel room, while my body was screaming at me about what it had not been able to do. She did that in front of me, more than once. I did not know what to say. I learned slowly that what to say was nothing. What to do was sit on the bed with her, pour her a glass of water, be there. I have used those two words a lot since. They are not original to me. My mother used them. Serena's mother used them. The two of us, when we are talking about what we owe each other, use them. Be there. Tennis taught me what they meant in a way I had not, before tennis, fully understood. Tennis taught me that love is a Tuesday in a hotel room when the body of the person you love has just lost a match it had been training a year for. In December of 2016, I asked her to marry me. I asked her at the same hotel where we had met, in Rome, in the same restaurant, at a table I had reserved. I had brought the ring in my jacket pocket. I had brought a small speech I had written on a flight to Italy on my laptop. I had brought also a list of every reason I knew that this was the right woman. I had not had to write the list down. I knew the list by heart. I had been adding to the list since the morning of the rat. I will tell you what she said. She said yes. She cried. I cried. The waiter did not know who we were. The waiter brought us a bottle of champagne we had not ordered. The waiter, by the end of the meal, did know who we were, because she had told him, with the grin I had first seen across a breakfast table 18 months before. She had told him that we had met right here. She had told him to remember. He has remembered. We have gone back. The hotel keeps an album of photographs. We are in it. I had, by that meal, been through the year that the world had not seen, and I had decided. The decision was the love. The decision was the work. I had decided that I was going to spend the rest of my life learning how to be there for this woman, in the small Tuesdays of her life, in the locker rooms, in the hotel rooms, in the kitchens, because the small Tuesdays were where the marriage was going to live. The Saturdays would take care of themselves. Chapter 7. Serena, the Australian Open, January 2017. I want to tell you before this chapter goes anywhere that I won the Australian Open in 2017 while I was 8 weeks pregnant. I want you to take a small breath after you read that sentence, because the sentence is a sentence I had to take a breath after when I figured it out, and I want you to take the same breath I took. I had not known, when I had flown to Melbourne, that I was pregnant. I had felt, in the days before the tournament, off in a way I had not been able to name. I had thought it was nerves. I had thought it was a virus. I had taken a test in a hotel bathroom in Melbourne 3 days before the tournament started, because my body had been telling me something I had not yet listened to, and the test had told me what my body had been trying to say. I was 8 weeks along. I was 35 years old. I was about to play my 8th Australian Open final in 15 years. I called Alexis. I told him. He cried. I cried. I asked him whether I should pull out. He said, in the way he says hard things, that the decision was mine. He said he would support whatever I chose. He said he would fly out that day if I wanted him there. I told him to wait. I told him I needed to think. I thought for a long minute. Then I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went to the court. I worked out. I called my coach. I told my coach. I told my doctor. I asked the doctor whether I could play. The doctor looked at me the way doctors look at women like me, who have asked them whether they can do a thing the doctor would prefer they did not. The doctor said with a sigh that I could play, that the pregnancy was early enough, that the risks were within the bounds of what an athlete in early pregnancy might run, that I should not fall, and that I should drink water. I played. I won the first round. I won the second round. I won the third round. I beat my sister in the final. The trophy was heavier than usual. I held it with both hands. The cameras did not know I was pregnant. The crowd did not know I was pregnant. My family did not know I was pregnant. Alexis knew. My doctor knew. My agent knew. The trophy went up. The cameras went off. I drove back to the hotel. I called my husband. I told him I had won. I told him our daughter had her first Grand Slam. I will tell you plainly what I felt. I felt the largest gratitude I had ever felt in a life that had taught me to be grateful. I felt the absolute presence of Yatunde. I felt my mother. I felt Alexis on the other end of the phone, 10,000 miles away, weeping. I felt the small life inside me at 8 weeks, no bigger than a fingerprint, and I felt that the small life had been with me on the court. The small life had been the 24th member of my team. The small life had been the difference. On the long match in the 3rd round when I had been down a break and had needed something my body did not anymore automatically have. I retired the racket to the locker room. I retired the body to the bath. I told the woman in my body, in the way pregnant women begin to talk to the women in their bodies, that we had done the thing. I told her her name. I had not told anybody else. I told her. I named her Olympia. I had picked the name long before. I had picked it because it sounded, on the tongue, like the place where a thing begins. I had picked it because it was the name of the city where the games had begun. I had picked it because I wanted my daughter to know, from the day she was born, that her mother had played her first Grand Slam with her. I had picked it because the name had a music in it that I wanted my daughter to walk around in. I would, in 9 months, very nearly die giving birth to her. I did not know that yet. I knew, that night, in a hotel bathtub in Melbourne, that I had won the Australian Open with my daughter for the first time, and that the next time we played a tournament together, we would play it from outside my body. I have never, in my life, been more tired and more whole than I was that night. Chapter 8. Alexis, the Decision. Spring, 2017. I want to tell you what I did between the Australian Open in January and the wedding in November. I had, between January and November, the largest year of my life. I had a fiancé who was pregnant with our first child. I had a venture firm to run. I had a Reddit board seat to keep an eye on. I had a mother who was no longer alive to tell what was happening. I had a German mother-in-law I had inherited in Oracine, who would welcome me into the family the way Oracine welcomes people into the family, with a long look and then a long meal. I will tell you what the long look was. Oracine had asked me, the first time I went to dinner at her house in Florida, what I had been raised to believe. I had told her that I had been raised in an Armenian apostolic household, with a German Lutheran mother who had pulled me to a Lutheran church on Easter and Christmas, and that I had spent my 20s sliding sideways out of any organized faith into a kind of vague gratitude that I had not, by the time I sat at her table, been able to name. Oracine had nodded. Oracine had said that gratitude was a fine starting place. Oracine had also said that her daughter had been raised inside a church, and that any man who married her daughter would have to make peace with the fact that her daughter prayed. I had told Oracine that night that I was happy to make peace with it. I had also told her that I was prepared to be educated in any way Oracine saw fit. Oracine had laughed. Oracine had said that the education would be slow. The education between January and November of 2017 was slow. I went to church with Serena on a number of Sundays. I did not pretend to know more than I did. I sat in the back. I listened. I bowed my head. I learned on those Sundays what the prayer was that my own mother had used the night before I had asked Serena to marry me. when I had called my mother in my head, even though she was no longer on this earth, and I had asked her whether I was sure. The prayer was a prayer of asking, Lord, am I sure? The prayer of an answer is a different prayer. The prayer of an answer is not a prayer one writes down. The prayer of an answer is an exhale. I exhaled. I went to the jeweler. I picked up the ring. I put it in the drawer. I took it out. I put it back in. I waited for the right night. I picked the wrong night twice. I picked the right night, eventually, in Rome. I want to also tell you what the most useful conversation of that whole year was, because it was not a conversation with Serena. It was a conversation with Richard. Richard had come up to me in a hallway at a tournament earlier in the spring, and he had pulled me aside, and he had said, in the voice that had been heard from 3 courts away, on every court he had ever stood on, that he had a question to ask me. The question was simple. The question was whether I was going to be a man for his daughter, or whether I was going to be a man for the cameras. I had told Richard, with an honesty I had not always had at 26 but had begun to grow at 33, that I had no interest in the cameras. I had told Richard that I was an internet entrepreneur, and that the internet had taught me, in a long, unflinching way, what cameras did to people. I had told Richard that I wanted to be a man who showed up. I had told Richard that I had already been showing up. I had told Richard that I was going to keep showing up. I had told Richard that the only thing I would ever ask him for, in this life, was the privilege of building a household with his youngest daughter, and earning, slowly, the right to be called by him by my first name. Richard had looked at me. He had not nodded. He had not smiled. He had said one sentence. He had said, plainly, that he would be watching. Then he had walked off. I had stood in the hallway of that arena for a full minute without moving. I had felt when I walked away that I had been blessed and warned in equal measure, which is, I have come to believe, the only kind of blessing a father's gives that is worth the damn. Then I went home. I bought the ring. I put it in the drawer. I waited. Part 3. The Wedding. Chapter 9. Serena, Olympia, September 2017. I will tell you what happened on the day Olympia was born. I will not tell you all of it, because not all of it is for the page. I will tell you what I have already told the world, in the Vogue essay I wrote, in the documentary I helped make, in the interviews I have given. I will tell you, in my own kitchen voice, what a hospital looks like from the inside when the woman in the bed is the one having the surgery. I had a planned cesarean. I have a high-risk profile for blood clots. I have had a pulmonary embolism before, in 2011, when a cut foot at a restaurant had thrown a clot that had landed in my lungs and had kept me out of tennis for the better part of a year. The team around me knew this. I knew this. Alexis knew this. The plan had been to deliver, watch me, manage the anticoagulants carefully, and bring my daughter into the world without incident. I had a daughter without incident. The cesarean went well. My doctor handed her to me. I held her. I cried. Alexis cried. The room was, for a small slice of an afternoon in September of 2017, exactly what we had been promised by the books and the magazines. A small new person on the chest of her mother. A man at the side of the bed, with a hand on her hair. I will tell you what happened the next day. I had been, in the standard way, taken off my anticoagulants for the surgery. The anticoagulants had been scheduled to come back on slowly in the days after to manage the cesarean bleeding. I had stood up. In a way, I should have known better than to stand up, to walk to a bathroom. I had felt, on the way to the bathroom, the way I had felt in 2011. I had felt my breathing tighten. I had felt the small alarm in my body that was the alarm of an embolism. I had walked, with help, into the hallway. I had told the nurse I needed a CT scan. I had told her I needed a heparin drip. I had told her, in plain words, what I knew about my own body. I had a pulmonary embolism. I had had one before. I knew the exact shape of it. The nurse, in the moment, told me to calm down. The nurse, in the moment, told me that maybe my pain medications had me confused. The nurse, in the moment, did not act. I will not put on the page what I felt then, because what I felt then is what every Black woman in an American hospital has felt when the body she has lived in for 35 years has been less believable to a stranger than the chart in the stranger's hand. I will tell you, plainly, that I asked again. I asked again. I asked again. I told them I wanted a doctor. I told them I wanted the doctor I had named. I told them what I needed. I am the woman I am, with the platform I have, with the volume I have, and even I had to ask 3 times. I will say this in the next breath. Most women do not get the privilege of asking 3 times. Most women ask once, are dismissed, and die. The doctor came. The CT scan happened. The clots were there. They had thrown to my lungs. They were going to throw further if we did not move. They started the heparin. The heparin saved my life. The heparin also, by its nature, made my cesarean incision bleed. I started coughing. The coughing tore my abdominal stitches. They had to take me back into surgery to stitch up the bleeding. They found, while they were in there, a hematoma the size of a fist behind the cesarean wound. They had to take me into another surgery to clear the hematoma. They had to put a filter into a vein in my groin to catch any new clots before they reached my heart. There were 6 surgeries in total in the first 7 days of my daughter's life. I do not remember most of them. I remember Alexis at the door. I remember my mother in the chair. I remember Olympia, who was by then on a small isolette in a corner of the room, the calmest baby I had ever seen, looking at the ceiling like she was already taking notes for her own life. I went home, eventually, on a stretcher. I lay flat for the better part of 2 months. I could not lift my own daughter. Alexis brought her to me. Alexis brought everything to me. Alexis fed me. Alexis sat on the edge of the bed at 3 a.m. and rocked her and told her in a low voice the story of the Cavalieri Hotel and the rat that had not been there. I have told the world what happened in that hospital because the world needed to know. I am telling you, in this audiobook, why I told the world. I told the world because no woman should have to ask 3 times. I told the world because no woman should have to be a champion to be believed. I told the world because the women who do not have my volume should not have to die in silence. The body knows. The body has always known. The body of a woman in childbirth knows, more than the chart, what is wrong. I will tell you what I learned about my husband in those weeks. He did not flinch. He did not, at any point, try to make me feel small for having needed him so completely. He did not, at any point, ask me to be more than I was. He brought me water. He brought me ice. He brought me Olympia. He sat in the chair. He answered the door. He paid the bills. He made the calls. He told my mother the news, so I would not have to. He, on the worst night, slept on the floor next to the bed because the chair was hurting his back and he wanted to be reachable if I called out. There is a thing married couples say, sometimes, about the moment they understood why they had married each other. I had not, before September of 2017, fully understood. I had thought I had. I had thought I had understood at the breakfast table in Rome. I had thought I had understood at the engagement dinner. I had thought I had understood at the first ultrasound. I had not understood. I understood in the 3rd week of the recovery. When he came into the bedroom with a small plate of toast, he had cut into the shape of a star because Olympia had a stuffed star on her bassinet, and he wanted me to laugh, and he gave me the plate, and he sat down on the bed, and he did not ask anything from me, and I understood. The toast kept being toast. The man kept being the man. The hospital kept doing its job. The recovery kept doing its job. The marriage, that is, kept doing its job. Chapter 10. Alexis, the Recovery and the Wedding, October to November, 2017. I will tell you what I did between Olympia coming home from the hospital and our wedding in New Orleans. I will tell you because I want any man listening to this audiobook to know that there is a particular education a husband gets when his wife is in a bed for 2 months, and that the education is the only education that turns a man into a husband. The other educations are flirtations. This one is the work. I learned to make oatmeal. I had not, before 2017, made oatmeal. I had eaten it. I had ordered it. I had not made it. I learned. I learned that you put the water in first. I learned that you stir. I learned that the oatmeal will tell you, by the way it sticks to the spoon, when it is done. I learned that a small amount of brown sugar is the difference between oatmeal and a punishment. I learned to bring the oatmeal to the bed. I learned to leave the oatmeal on the small table by the bed in case my wife was sleeping. I learned that a husband sometimes is a man who does not interrupt his wife's sleep to deliver oatmeal. I learned to hold Olympia. I had been a man before Olympia who had held babies for 10 seconds at a time at parties and given them back. I learned to hold a baby for 4 hours. I learned to walk a baby. I learned to sing to a baby. I will not tell you what I sang, because the songs were not very good, and I was not yet aware that the songs would matter to the small human being on my shoulder. I sang what I knew. I sang lullabies in German that I had not known I had remembered, because my mother had sung them to me, and they had come back to me the way old songs come back, in the kitchen at 3 in the morning when there is nobody else around to hear me sing. I learned to call. I called Oracine when Serena was asleep. I called Richard when Serena was awake, and Richard wanted to hear her voice. I called Venus, who was, in her quiet way, a presence in our house, even when she was not in our house. I learned that the family of the woman I had married was, by an arithmetic of the soul, my own family now, and that the calls were the way the family stayed knit. I made the wedding plans. The wedding had been planned, in its bones, before Olympia. The wedding was going to be in November in New Orleans, at the Contemporary Arts Center, with a Beauty and the Beast theme that Serena had wanted since she was a small girl in Compton watching the movie on a VCR with her sisters. I held the threads of the planning together while she lay in the bed. I took calls from the planner. I approved table numbers. I picked, with input from a friend of mine who had taste, the music for the cocktail hour. I did not decide anything material without bringing it to her. I brought every choice to her bedside. She made every choice. I executed it. The wedding happened on November 16th of 2017. We had by then been married already, in the kitchen of our home. In the small, everyday way two people who have a baby together are already married. The ceremony was the public version of a private fact. I want you to understand the difference, because the world tends to confuse the two. The wedding is the day you let the world watch. The marriage is what you do every other day. The wedding was beautiful. We had pictures taken. The tables were named for her grand slams. There were 23 tables. Each one had a number. Beyoncé sat at one of them. Kim Kardashian sat at another. My best friend Steve, who had built Reddit with me in a small apartment in Massachusetts when we were 22, walked Olympia down the aisle in a small gold dress. Olympia did not cry. Olympia did not even fuss. Olympia looked, at 3 months old, like a small queen who had decided that the room was acceptable. Serena walked down the aisle in a long white dress, with a train so long that 2 attendants carried it, and she carried, in her hands, a bouquet of white roses. And she looked at me, when she got to me, with the same look she had given me in the breakfast room of the Cavalieri 30 months before. The look was the same. The marriage, from the morning of the rat to the night of the wedding, had been the same all along. I had written my vows on a flight 3 days before. I read them. I do not remember most of them. I remember the last line. The last line was that I was going to be there. The last line was that I had been told by the woman I was now marrying that the men who lasted were the men who showed up, and that I was going to show up in the kitchen, on the courts, on the planes, in the hospitals, in the ordinary Tuesdays of the rest of our life. The last line was that she had given me, by marrying me, the privilege of being a man who showed up. The last line was a thank you. She read hers. They were better than mine. She always wrote better than I did. She always also hit a tennis ball better than I did. I had married, knowingly and gratefully, the more talented half of the household. We danced. The band played tale as old as time. We did not that night have a thing in our heads about what would come next. We had Olympia. We had each other. We had, on a side table at the back of the reception, an envelope a friend had given us with a piece of paper inside that said, in handwriting, that the friend had bought a small percentage of an English football club called Wrexham, and that if I wanted in, I should let him know in the spring. I did not that night look at the envelope. The envelope would matter later. For the night, what mattered was the band and the dance and the woman in the white dress and the small daughter asleep in her grandmother's arms in the corner, and the 38 years of marriage I was, that night, signing up for, or maybe 40, or maybe 50, depending on what the Lord had in mind. Lord, I prayed, in the small upstairs room of my own self, as the band played on. Help me show up. Part 4, The Quiet Years. Chapter 11, Serena, Mothers and Tennis, 2018 to 2019. I will tell you what the first year of motherhood and tennis looked like. I will tell you because the world has only seen the parts that the cameras saw, and the cameras saw the wrong year. The cameras saw the United States Open final of 2018, where I argued with the chair umpire, and the press wrote about it for a month. The cameras did not see the morning. The morning was when the year actually happened. The morning was Olympia and a bottle. I was breastfeeding. I have said before, in more interviews than I want to count, that I struggled. I struggled. I will tell you what struggling looks like. Struggling looks like a woman who has won 23 Grand Slams sitting in a rocking chair at 4 a.m. trying to calm a baby who will not latch and trying not to wake the husband on the other side of the bedroom because the husband has work to do in the morning. Struggling looks like a woman calling her sister Venus on the phone at 5 a.m. to ask whether what is happening is normal. Struggling looks like a husband who hears the call anyway and gets up and brings me coffee and sits next to me until the baby is calm again. I had also, that whole year, been training. I had been training to come back. I had been training because the body that had won 23 Grand Slams had decided, somewhere underneath the surgeries and the recovery, that it had not yet finished. I had been training because Wimbledon was coming up, and I had a wild card, and the only way I knew to celebrate the fact that I was alive was to play. I went to Wimbledon. I made the final. I lost. I cried. I went to the United States Open. I made the final. I had a hard match. I had a difficult moment with an umpire. The press wrote what the press wrote. I will not relitigate the United States Open in this audiobook. I will tell you that I went home from that final, and I sat with my husband, and we ate dinner, and I told him I was tired, and he told me he was proud of me. And the next day, Olympia laughed for the first time, and the laugh was bigger than the final. I want to tell you what I learned in 2018. I learned that motherhood is not a season of tennis. Motherhood is a different sport. The moves are different. The clock is different. The score is different. Motherhood does not give you a final. Motherhood gives you instead 1,000 small Tuesdays in a row, and the Tuesdays are the wins. I had been a woman who knew what to do with a final. I had not, before Olympia, been a woman who knew what to do with a Tuesday. I learned. I am still learning. My husband helped. I will tell you what my husband did in 2018 that surprised me. He kept showing up. I had not thought it would be hard for him to keep showing up. I had thought he was the kind of man who showed up by nature. I learned that year that no man shows up by nature. Every man who shows up is the result of a daily, small, often unphotographed decision. The decision is the love. The decision, by the morning of the United States Open final, had been made 800 times. He sat in my box at the United States Open with Olympia in his lap. The cameras saw it. The cameras did not see what happened in our hotel room before the match. He had, on the day of the final, woken up at 4 a.m. to give Olympia a bottle so I could sleep. He had, on the morning of the final, made me oatmeal. He had brought me a glass of water. He had told me, in the small upstairs room of our own life, that I was a champion, that I had been a champion before Olympia, and would be a champion after Olympia, but that I was, in the kitchen with him, a wife and a mother, and that the wife and the mother were the parts he was married to. The champion, he said, was going to do what champions do. The wife and the mother, he said, were going to come home. That is what I went out and played for, the wife, the mother, the husband, the daughter in his lap, the sister in the family box, the mother in the family box, the father at home in front of the television. The world has never quite known how to read a tennis match through that lens. The lens is, I will tell you, the only lens worth reading any of my matches through. The lens is what the matches were always about. Chapter 12, Alexis, Wrexham, and a Soccer Club, 2019 to 2020. I want to tell you briefly about a soccer club in a small town in North Wales. The soccer club is called Wrexham. The town is called Wrexham. The soccer club is one of the oldest professional soccer clubs in the world. By 2019, the soccer club was in the 5th division of English football. The town that had loved it had been losing it for 30 years. I had a friend in Hollywood who was an actor named Ryan Reynolds. I had met him because Serena was friends with his wife. I had liked him because he was not, in person, the version of him I had seen on television. He was quieter. He was less polished. He cared about things. We had gotten coffee a few times. We had talked about the internet. He had asked me, at one of those coffees, whether I would ever want to invest in a soccer club. I had told him I knew nothing about soccer. He had told me he knew nothing about soccer either, but that the club in question was the kind of club that, if you bought it and ran it well, was a small civic act, and that small civic acts were rare in the world. I told him I would think about it. I went home. I told Serena. Serena told me, in her plain way, that if Ryan Reynolds was offering me the chance to do a small civic act in a small town in Wales, I should at least go look at the town. I went and looked at the town. I sat in a pub in Wrexham. I talked to a woman who had, on her wall, a framed photograph of her father in a Wrexham scarf from 1968. The woman told me that the soccer club was the reason her father had had a Saturday. The woman told me that her father had died 10 years ago. The woman told me that the club, even at the bottom of the table, was the way the town remembered the man. I went home. I told Serena. I said I wanted in. Serena told me to write the check. I wrote the check. I will not, in this audiobook, tell the long story of Wrexham. The long story has been told on a documentary that runs to 5 seasons, and you can watch it. I will tell you that Wrexham, in 2020, became a thing that Serena and I cared about together. I will tell you that we would, in the years that followed, take Olympia to Wrexham Games. I will tell you that Olympia, who would learn to read at 4 years old in our kitchen on Long Island, would also learn, at 4 years old, the chant of a soccer team in North Wales. I will tell you that there is a photograph on the inside of a cabinet door in our kitchen of Olympia in a small Wrexham scarf, taken in a stadium I had never imagined I would stand in. I tell you this because the marriage, by 2020, was no longer just a marriage. The marriage was a household. The household had a tennis champion in it, and a venture capitalist in it, and a daughter in it, and now, by way of an actor friend in Hollywood, a soccer club in North Wales. The household was beginning to have, around it, the kind of geography that long marriages have. Long marriages have geographies. Short marriages have addresses. The difference between the two is what happens between you in places that are not your home. I want to also tell you in this chapter that 2020 was the year I left the Reddit board. I had been on the board in one form or another since I had been 23 years old. I had, by the spring of 2020, watched the country I lived in tear itself apart over the death of a black man named George Floyd. I had a black daughter. I had a black wife. I had been, my whole adult life, a man who had built a website that was, at its best, a place where the country talked to itself, and at its worst, a place where the country yelled at itself. I had been wrestling for years with what to do about the worst. I made a decision. I called the Reddit board. I told them I wanted to step down from my seat. I told them I wanted my seat to be filled by a black candidate. I told them I would resign by the end of the call. I resigned by the end of the call. The board, after some scrambling, filled the seat with a man named Michael Seibel, who had been a friend of mine for years, and who was, by every measure, a better board member than I had been. I told Serena that night, after I had hung up the phone. Serena did not, at first, say anything. She walked across the kitchen. She put her hand on my shoulder. She said one sentence. She said that my mother would have been proud. I cried. She held me. I had, by that night, been a husband for 2.5 years. I had not yet been a husband long enough to stop being surprised by what marrying her had given me. I am still being surprised. I have been a husband, by the time you are listening to this audiobook, for closer to a decade. The surprise has not stopped. Lord, I prayed in the small upstairs room of my own self that night as Serena walked back to the kitchen. Thank you. Chapter 13. Serena, saying the word, July to August, 2022. I want to tell you what it took to write the Vogue essay. I will tell you what it took because the world has read the essay, and the world has not read the year that came before it. In July of 2022, I was 40 years old. I had been on the tour for 27 years. I had won 23 Grand Slams. I had been chasing a 24th Grand Slam, which would have tied the record held by Margaret Court, for 5 years. I had not, in 5 years, won one. I had come close. I had lost finals at Wimbledon. I had lost a final at the United States Open. I had been, in a stadium full of 40,000 people, the woman who wanted the 24th and could not get the 24th, and had, in the seat in the locker room after the match, asked the same question I asked every time I lost a final. Did the body do what it could? Did the body do what it could? The body had, by 2022, started to answer the question differently. The body had, by then, told me that it was tired. The body had not, before 2022, ever told me that it was tired. The body had told me, before 2022, that it was hungry, that it was thirsty, that it was sore, that it was sleepy. It had told me a lot of things. It had not before told me that it was tired in the way a body that has done its job tells you it has done its job. I sat with my husband on the porch of our house in Florida one evening in early July. The sun was going down over the dock. Olympia was inside watching a movie. We were drinking tea. I told him what the body had been telling me. He did not at first say anything. He let me finish. When I was done, he said one thing. He said that he thought the body was right. He said it not as a diagnosis. He said it as a witness. He had been watching the body for 7 years. He had been, in his own quiet way, taking notes. He had seen the body do what no other body had done in tennis. He had also seen the body do what no body should have to do in a hospital in West Palm Beach 4 years before. He had earned the right to be a witness. He said he thought the body had earned a different season of life. He said he thought our daughter had earned a different season of mother. He said he thought the venture firm I had been building, Serena Ventures, was a thing I had built half-time and that it was time to give it the other half. He said all of this in the way he says hard things, plainly, without trying to lead me where I had not yet decided to go. He also said one other thing. He said that whatever I decided, he would be on the next plane. If I decided to play another year, he would be on the next plane. If I decided to retire, He would be on the next plane. The plane was the thing. The plane was always going to be the thing. I sat with the conversation for 2 weeks. I called Venus. I called Oracene. I sat in church on Sunday and asked the Lord what He wanted. I will tell you what I heard. I heard, in the small upstairs room of my own self, the same exhale I had heard in 2017 on the night of the engagement dinner. The exhale of an answer. I started writing. I wrote the essay myself. I did not, on the early drafts, share it with Alexis. I wanted to find the words first. I wrote the word retirement. I crossed it out. I wrote the word ending. I crossed it out. I wrote the word evolution. The word evolution stayed. I wrote about my daughter. I wrote about wanting another. I wrote about what it had cost me at 35 and 39 and 40 to keep playing. I wrote about my mother. I wrote about my father. I wrote, in the middle of the essay, 2 sentences that I have not since been able to read without crying. I wrote that I had never liked the word retirement, because retirement, in the way the world used it, sounded like a man walking off a job. I had not been on a job. I had been on a vocation. The vocation was not ending. The vocation was changing rooms. I sent the essay to Vogue in late July. They published it on August 9th. The world responded in the way the world responds. Most of the response was kind. Some of it was not. I did not, that day, read the response. I sat on the porch of our house with my husband. We watched the sun go down. Olympia ran around the yard with our dog. The phones lit up. We did not pick them up. He said one thing that night, after the sun had gone. He said that my mother and Yetundi, between them, had been telling the same story all along. The story had been about a woman who knew when to enter a room and when to leave it. The leaving was not the failure. The leaving was the second half of the entering. He said it the way a man says a thing he has been thinking about for a long time. I leaned my head on his shoulder. I cried. He held me. The dog kept being a dog. The yard kept being a yard. The marriage kept doing its job. Chapter 14. Alexis, the Met Gala, May 2023. I will tell you what happened on the night Serena and I went to the Met Gala in May of 2023. I will tell you because the world saw a Gucci gown and a smile and a hand on a stomach, and the world wrote 100 captions, and not one of those captions was the caption I would have written, because the caption I would have written would have been longer than a caption is allowed to be. We had been trying for a second daughter for months. We had been trying for a second daughter in the way people who have trouble try, with patience and humility, and a calendar that we did not always like to look at. Serena had told me in the spring of 2023 in our kitchen in Florida that she was pregnant. She had told me by way of a small ultrasound photograph she had set on the counter while I was pouring coffee, the way she had once set a tennis racket on the counter to sneak past me into the next sentence of our life. I had cried. I had hugged her. I had held the small photograph in my hand. I had walked with the photograph to the porch. I had sat on the porch. I had let myself feel what I was feeling. What I was feeling was that the family of 3 was about to become a family of 4. What I was feeling was that the woman I loved had told me in the most ordinary kitchen voice the most extraordinary thing in our shared life. What I was feeling was the absolute presence of my own mother, who had been gone by then for 10 years, and who had told me in her German accent on a Maryland porch when I was 15 years old that the right woman was not going to be the wrong woman in disguise. I went back inside. I told Serena that I wanted to find a way to share the news with the world that would let the world be glad with us without letting the world own us. Serena thought about it. Serena had by then gotten an invitation to the Met Gala with the theme of Karl Lagerfeld and a memorial through the lens of Chanel. Serena had been invited to the Met Gala before. Serena had in fact gone the year before while she was thinking about the Vogue essay. Serena said she had an idea. She wanted to wear a dress that did not hide the news. She wanted to walk the steps. She wanted to let the world figure out the news on its own. I told her I loved the idea. I told her I would walk the steps with her. I told her we would announce it in our own way. She wore Gucci. I will tell you what the dress looked like. The dress was midnight black. The dress had a column of beadwork down the front. The dress was cut to honor a body that was, at that moment, holding two of us. She walked the steps. The cameras did the math. By the time she had reached the top of the steps, the world had figured it out. She put her hand on her stomach. I put my hand on her hand. She wrote a caption on her own phone in her own voice. The caption said that Anna Wintour had invited the three of us. The caption broke the internet. The caption was, in the end, a sentence I had nothing to do with. We went back to the hotel that night. I took the shoes off her feet. I rubbed her ankles. I told her she had been the most beautiful woman in New York. She told me I was biased. I told her bias was the privilege of marriage. I told her, in the small upstairs room of my own self, what I had been trying to tell her since the night of the Vogue essay. I had told her then that the leaving was the second half of the entering. I told her, that night in the hotel, that the entering had begun a new sentence. The new sentence was ours. Part 5. The Trial. Chapter 15. Serena, Adira, August 2023. I will tell you what Adira's birth was like. I will tell you because the world has, by now, heard the story of Olympia's birth, and the world might assume that Adira's birth was the same. It was not the same. The team that delivered Adira had read the chart. The team that delivered Adira had a different plan. The team that delivered Adira moved when my body told them what was wrong. The first time I asked. That sentence took me 6 years to be able to say. Adira was born on August 22nd of 2023 in a hospital that I will not name in this audiobook because the hospital does not need my publicity. The hospital had read the chart. The hospital had a vascular surgeon on the floor before I went under. The hospital had a heparin protocol on the table. The hospital had, in the room with me, a doctor who had read every word of the Vogue essay I had written about Olympia, and who had taken, before Serena Williams ever walked in the door, a small private oath that the woman in front of him would not have to ask 3 times. I had a planned cesarean. The cesarean went well. They handed me Adira. I held her. Alexis cried. I cried. Olympia, who had come into the recovery room in a small lab coat she had borrowed from a doctor friend who had given it to her as a gift, walked up to her sister and put her hand on her sister's foot and said hello in her small 5-year-old voice. The next day was, by the grace of God and the work of my team, a different next day from the next day of 2017. There was no embolism. There was no second surgery. There was no nurse in a hallway who did not believe me. There was instead a hospital bed with a baby on it, and a husband at the foot of the bed, and a phone call from my mother, and a Tuesday, that turned into a Wednesday, that turned into a homecoming. We took Adira home 4 days after she was born. The drive home was 20 minutes. Alexis drove the speed limit. Olympia, in the back seat, narrated the drive to Adira, the way a small child narrates everything to a smaller child. We pulled into our driveway. Our dog ran out. The trees had been doing their job. The house had been doing its job. I will tell you what I felt on the front step of our house the moment I carried Adira inside. I felt the hand of Yetundi. I felt the hand of my mother. I felt the hand of Vera, the great aunt of the man behind me, who had not technically been my great aunt, but who had become, by marriage, the great aunt of my daughters. I felt the hand of every black woman in an American hospital who had not been believed and had died because of it. I felt my husband's hand on the small of my back, where his hand had been since the day he had stood up at the breakfast table in Rome to come sit at mine. I told Adira her name. I told her that her middle name was River. I told her that her middle name had been chosen because a river is a thing that keeps moving. I told her that her father had picked the middle name in our kitchen in the spring of 2023, when we had been trying for her and had been afraid she was not coming. I told her that her name meant, in the language of her grandfather Richard, that we had not given up on her. I told her that her sister was Olympia. I told her that her sister was waiting on the couch with a juice box she had been saving for the occasion. I told her finally, in the small upstairs room of my own self, that the day she had come home was the day my husband and I had earned the second half of our life together. He had earned it. I had earned it. We had earned it. She did not, at 4 days old, understand any of it. She slept against my chest. The chest kept doing its job. The breath kept doing its job. The husband kept doing his job. The marriage kept doing its job. Chapter 16. Alexis, Long Island, and a Tuesday, 2024. I want to tell you what a Tuesday in our house looks like. 4 years into being a father of 2 daughters. I want to tell you because the world only sees the Saturdays. The world only sees the Met Galas, the Wimbledons, the Reddit IPOs, the Wrexham promotions, the ribbon cuttings. The world does not see the Tuesdays. The Tuesdays are where the marriage lives. I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I make coffee. The kitchen is quiet. The dog is asleep on a small bed in the corner. I sit at the counter. I read the news. I read 3 newsletters. I write, by hand, a short list of the 3 things I want to do today. I have done that since my mother died. I had not, before she died, been a man who wrote a list. I have been one since. Serena gets up around 6:30. She comes into the kitchen barefoot. She kisses the top of my head. She pours coffee. She sits across from me. We talk for about 11 minutes about nothing in particular. The 11 minutes are the most important 11 minutes of the day. The 11 minutes are the 11 minutes that make the rest of the marriage work. Olympia gets up around 7. She comes downstairs with her hair the way it is, which is a question that takes her mother 40 minutes to answer every morning. Adira gets up around 7:30, at which point the kitchen has stopped being a kitchen and has become a small theater. There is breakfast. There is a discussion of why one daughter does not want to wear the shirt the other daughter is wearing. There is the dog, who has decided that the small theater is the place where snacks fall. There is, on the counter, a school lunch I will, by 8:15, have packed. I drive Olympia to school. I have driven her to school every morning I am in town, since she was old enough to go. I have driven her in rain. I have driven her in hurricanes. I have driven her on mornings I had a flight at noon, with my carry-on bag in the trunk, so that I could drop her off and drive directly to the airport. The drive is 24 minutes. We listen to a podcast she likes. She tells me about her week. She asks me, sometimes, what a word means. I tell her. She thinks. She tells me whether my answer is correct. She has been correcting me, kindly, since she was 4. I come home. Adira is by then with our nanny, who has been with us for 2 years, and who is, by every measure, family. I sit at my desk. I work for 4 hours. I take calls. I read pitch decks. I write notes to founders. I have by lunch done what I came to my desk to do. I eat lunch with Serena. We sit on the porch. We do not, on most lunches, talk about anything important. We talk about the weather. We talk about the dog. We talk about a book one of us is reading. The lunches are the second most important meal of the day, after the 11 minutes in the morning. In the afternoon, I drive to pick up Olympia. We do, on the way home, the second podcast. I work for another hour after we get home. By dinner, I have stopped being a venture capitalist and have started being a husband and a father, and the two are not the same job, although they share some of the same skills. We eat, we bathe 2 daughters, we read books, we sing songs. By 8:30, the daughters are asleep. Serena and I sit on the couch. We watch 1 episode of one show. We do not, in our marriage, watch more than 1 episode of one show in a sitting. The rule has been a rule for years. The rule is that the second episode is the episode that takes the marriage's evening. We do not give the marriage's evening to a streaming service. We go to bed. We pray. We sleep. That is a Tuesday. That is, in fact, every Tuesday. The Tuesdays have been almost identical for 2 years. The world looks at me and Serena and assumes the world is full of Saturdays. The world is not full of Saturdays. The world is full of Tuesdays. The Tuesdays are why the Saturdays make sense. I will tell you on the next page what we do on Wednesdays. Chapter 17. Serena. Serena Ventures and a Word for It. 2024 to 2025. I will tell you what Serena Ventures is, since I have mentioned it in this audiobook and not yet explained it. Serena Ventures is a venture capital firm I started in 2014, before I met Alexis, when I had been doing some early stage investing on my own and had begun to want to do it under a name that was a name. The firm was small at first. I wrote checks out of my own pocket. I invested in companies I had used. I invested in companies I would have wanted to use as a teenage girl in Compton. I invested in companies that were owned and run by women. By 2022, the firm had moved to a different floor of a different building, and we had a fund. The fund was $64 million. The fund was capitalized by a number of institutional investors who had decided, after a long string of conversations, that I was a serious general partner and that the firm I had built was a serious firm. The fund was, by a number any tennis player would recognize, a small fund. It was, for a former tennis player who had decided that her second life was going to involve writing checks to founders who looked like the girls she had grown up with, a beginning. By 2024, I had a team. The team was small. The team was, almost without exception, women. The team was, almost without exception, women who had not, in their careers, been the obvious hire. We had a partner who had grown up in Lagos. We had a partner who had grown up in St. Louis. We had an investment associate who had grown up in Brooklyn and had, in her interview with me, told me that she had been a young woman who had played tennis on a public court in her neighborhood as a teenager because she had seen me play tennis on a public court in mine. I had hired her in the same conversation. She has, since, made me money. The hiring was not charity. The hiring was strategy. I will tell you why I have stayed in this work. I have stayed in this work because the work has a long timeline. Tennis, for all the love I have for it, is a short timeline. You walk on a court, you play a match, you win or you lose. You go to bed, you start over the next day. Venture capital, by contrast, is a slow art. You pick a company, you write a small check, you wait 7 years, you wait 10 years, you watch the company grow up, you watch the company make 1,000 small decisions. You give occasionally the small piece of advice you can give. You watch. I have come to love the watching. The watching is the prayer. The watching is the part of being a former champion that has the most in common with being a mother. The watching is the part where you put down the racket and you let the next person hit the ball. Alexis has been, in this work, my closest collaborator and also my most frequent dissenter. We do not, on every deal, agree. We have, on some deals, fought. We have, on more than one occasion, walked away from a deal because one of us was not, in our gut, sure. We have walked away from deals that 3 years later made other people a lot of money. We have also walked into deals together that the rest of the market had passed on, because one or both of us had been able to see what the rest of the market had not seen. The rest of the market has, I will tell you, frequently been wrong. I will tell you what I learned by the end of 2024 that I had not known when I had started the firm. I had not known that the most important part of building a firm was the people. I had thought, in the way most beginners think, that the most important part of a firm was the deals. The deals are not the firm. The deals are the way the firm tells itself the truth about itself. The firm is the people who are sitting around the table when the deals come in. I had built the firm by building the table. I had been doing it without quite knowing I was doing it. I am still doing it. I have come to think, in 2025, that the firm and the marriage are the same project in different clothing. The marriage is a household. The firm is a household with a balance sheet. Both are about who is at the table. Both are about whether the people at the table are willing to tell each other the truth. Both are about whether the people at the table are willing to keep showing up on the Tuesdays. Alexis is at my table. He has been at my table for 10 years. He is, on the Tuesdays, the easiest person at my table. On the Wednesdays, when one of us has a fight to pick, he is the second easiest. On the Thursdays, when there is a deal we are not sure about, he is the most useful. On the Fridays, when the week has been long and we are tired, he is the kindest. On the Saturdays, when the cameras come, he is the quietest. On the Sundays, when we are in church, he is the most present. The 7 days of the week are different rooms. He has been, in every room, the man at the table. I had told my daughter Olympia last fall, when she had asked me what made a good marriage, that a good marriage was made up of the small daily decisions. I had told her that there was no big decision. I had told her that the big decisions, when they come, take care of themselves, because the small decisions before them have made the big ones easy. I had told her finally that her father had been making the small decisions in our favor. in his quiet way, since the morning of the rat. She had asked me what the rat was. I had told her. She had laughed. She had walked away. She had gone to her room. She had an hour later come back, and she had asked one more question. She had asked whether I had ever, in my life, regretted the rat. I had told her no. I had told her that the rat had been the best thing I had ever invented. I had told her that her father had not, in fact, believed the rat for more than 3 seconds, but that he had stayed at the table anyway, because he was the kind of man who stayed at tables. I had told her that the staying was the love. I had told her that the staying was the work. She had nodded. She had gone back to her room. The kitchen kept being a kitchen. The marriage kept doing its job. Chapter 18. Alexis. Compton Conference Call, 2025. I want to tell you about a phone call. I will tell you about a phone call because I am a man who builds, as I said earlier in this audiobook, and the things I have built have, mostly, been built on phone calls. The phone call I am about to tell you about was made on a Sunday afternoon in February of 2025. I had, on the call, my wife, my father-in-law Richard, my brother-in-law Reggie, who had married into the family on Yatundi's side, and a man on the other side of the country who had been the original tennis coach of the Williams sisters in 1984. The man's name was Paul Cohen. Paul had been one of the first coaches Richard had brought to the public courts of Compton, when Serena had been 3 years old and Venus had been 4. Paul had not, in the years since, been a public part of the Williams family story in any consistent way. Paul had been, however, a witness to the strip of asphalt where my wife had first picked up a racket. We had decided, in the small upstairs room of our marriage, that it was time to bring the witnesses home. The phone call was the first call. There would be other calls. There would be a small dinner in Florida. There would be a return visit to Compton, in which my wife and her sisters would, one afternoon in March of 2025, walk back onto the same lot where their father had once dragged baskets of yellow tennis balls. The visit would not be on the news. The visit would not be on Instagram. The visit would be a private one. I would, on the visit, sit in the car. The visit was not mine. The visit was theirs. I tell you this because I want any man listening to this audiobook to understand the long arithmetic of marrying a woman whose family has a story. The story does not stop being a story when she stops playing. The story does not stop being a story when the daughters arrive. The story keeps being a story. The husband, if he is a good husband, keeps being a witness to the story. The husband is not the protagonist. The husband is a chair pulled out at the table. The husband is the one who, on a Sunday afternoon in February, picks up the phone and dials a number and asks an old coach from Compton if he would like to come to dinner. Richard, on the call, was the way Richard has always been. Richard was loud. Richard was funny. Richard, at 82 years old, was still, in every important way, the man who had dragged the baskets onto the court. He had, in his old age, developed a softness. The softness was for his grandchildren mostly. The softness was also for me. I had not always been welcome at Richard's table. I had been welcome at the table as a fiancé. I had been welcome at the table as a husband. I had, by 2025, been welcome at the table as a son. The progression had taken a decade. I was not, on the day of the call, anything other than grateful. I want to tell you finally about a small phrase I had picked up from Richard. The phrase was Compton Conference Call. The phrase had been Richard's joke for any decision in the family that needed all of the daughters and all of the spouses on the line at once. The phrase had become, over the years, a private idiom in our marriage. Whenever Serena and I had to make a decision that one of us needed family input on, the family input was a Compton conference call. The phrase had nothing to do anymore with Compton. The phrase had to do, instead, with the table. Whenever you sit down at a table with a number of people and you decide a thing that affects all of them at once, you are on a Compton conference call. The phrase is Richard's. The phrase, like a lot of what Richard has given me, is now mine. We are still in 2026, the year you are listening to this audiobook, having Compton conference calls. The calls have new people on them every year. The calls have also lost some of the original people. The calls keep being the calls. That, in the end, is what a family does. The family keeps being a family. The husband keeps being a witness. The marriage, that is, keeps doing its job. Chapter 19. Serena, 2 daughters and a dance floor, 2025. I will tell you what we do at home, at night, when nobody is watching. I will tell you because most of the world thinks we are still in our wedding clothes. We are not. We are, on most nights, in pajamas. The pajamas are not, in any sense, photogenic. The pajamas are the truest part of our marriage. We have, in our living room in Florida, a small Bluetooth speaker. The speaker, on most nights, between dinner and bath time, plays the song the daughters have decided is the song of the week. Olympia, who is, at this writing, 8 years old, picks 1. Adira, who is 2, votes with her body. The dance floor is the rug. The audience is the dog. I will tell you what last week was. Last week was a Beyoncé song. Olympia had been listening to it in the car. Olympia had, between her own school and her ballet, decided that the song deserved to be the song of the week. We danced. Adira, who has only recently learned to walk, walked in a small circle and held her hands above her head. Alexis, who is 6'5" and has, since the day I met him, danced like a man who had never been to a wedding. Danced. He has gotten worse at it over the years, not better. He used to have moves. He used to have what could charitably be called a step. He has lost the step. He danced anyway. The daughters laughed. The dog barked. The husband, who had not had a step at 22 and had not, by 43, found one, kept dancing. I will tell you what I felt. I felt the largest gratitude I had ever felt. I felt that I had, by some grace I had not earned, been given the second half of the entering my husband had told me about on the night of the Vogue essay. I felt on a Thursday night in Florida that the small upstairs room of my own self had moved downstairs into the living room and become the dance floor. The dance floor was the small upstairs room. The dance floor was the prayer. The dance floor was the answer. The phone that night was on the kitchen counter, because I had that morning made a rule that the phone would be on the kitchen counter between the hours of 6 and 9. The phone, accordingly, did not record the dance. The dance was for the daughters. The dance was for the dog. The dance was for the husband. The dance, in the end, was for me. The next morning, Alexis got up at 5:30. He made coffee. He wrote his 3 things on a small list. The kitchen kept being a kitchen. The dog kept being a dog. The Tuesday, when it came, kept being a Tuesday. The marriage, on the dance floor, and in the kitchen, and in the morning, kept doing its job. Part 6. The Resolution. Chapter 20. Alexis. A Speech at 40, April 2026. I want to tell you before this audiobook ends what I said at a dinner in our home last weekend. The dinner was small. The dinner was for our anniversary. We had, by our calendar, been together for a decade and married for almost 9 years. The dinner, in keeping with the household we have built, was at our table, with our 2 daughters in attendance, Olympia, in a dress she had chosen herself, and Adira, in a small striped pajama set she had refused to take off after bath, and one couple of friends who have been with us through more of the marriage than any other. I had been asked by my wife to say a small toast. I had, for the better part of a week, been writing the toast in my head while driving Olympia to school. I had not written it down. I have learned, in 9 years of being a husband to a woman who can give a press conference on the spot, to give my toasts without notes. I will tell you what I said. I said first that I had been a man before I met my wife, who had not understood what a household was. I had grown up in a good household. I will tell you that. My mother and father had given me a good household. I will not, in this toast or in this audiobook, take that from them. I will tell you that the household I had grown up in had, by the time I had reached my late 20s, become a memory. My mother had died. My father had moved. The kitchen of my growing up had been replaced in my own life by a series of apartments. I had been, by the time I met my wife, a man without a kitchen. I said, next, that the woman across the table from me had given me back a kitchen. I do not mean a kitchen in the literal sense, although she has given me one of those too, in our house in Florida, with the morning light coming through and the dog asleep on a small bed in the corner. I mean a kitchen in the older sense. A kitchen is a place where the food is made. A kitchen is a place where the love is made. A kitchen is a place where the children are made. A kitchen is a place where, on a Sunday afternoon, you decide to call an old coach in California and bring the past back into the present. I said, third, that I had been told on the 3rd night of the French Open in 2015 that the men who lasted were the men who showed up. I had heard it lightly. I had heard it seriously. I had decided that week to live up to the seriousness. I had decided again on the night of the engagement dinner. I had decided again on the morning of the wedding. I had decided again on every Tuesday since. I had been, by the toast, a man who had made the decision, in his own counting, somewhere upwards of 3,000 mornings in a row. I said, fourth, that the woman across the table from me had, in her own quiet way, made the decision the same number of times. The marriage, I said, was the only project I had ever been a part of where both of us showed up to the same meeting at the same time, in the same room, with the same agenda, 3,000 mornings in a row. The world thinks of marriage as a contract. The marriage we have built is not a contract. The marriage we have built is a meeting. The meeting is the morning. The agenda is the day. The minutes are the children, the dog, the breakfast, the 11 minutes at the counter. I said finally that I had been, since the day I met my wife, a man who was learning. I had learned tennis. I had learned cesarean recovery. I had learned brain cancer. I had learned the inside of a hospital. I had learned the inside of a press conference. I had learned how to braid hair. I had learned how to read an ultrasound. I had learned the chant of a soccer team in North Wales. I had learned, finally, the exact shape of a wife. of 2 daughters, of a household. I had learned, slowest of all, the shape of myself in the household. I am, at 43 years old, still learning. The household has been kind to me as a student. The marriage, that is, keeps doing its job. I raised my glass. I said the small Armenian toast my great-aunt Vera had taught me when I was 7. The toast translates roughly to long life. The translation is a thin one. The deeper meaning is closer to a prayer. May the table you are sitting at be the table you sit at for the rest of your life. We drank. We ate. The dog, who had no glass, came over to my chair and laid his head on my foot, the way he does. The candles kept burning. The kitchen kept being a kitchen. The marriage, that is, kept doing its job. Chapter 21. Serena. A letter to my daughters. April 2026. I am going to write something to my daughters in this chapter, the way a mother writes to her daughters. The chapter will be short. The chapter is not for any of you on the other end of this audiobook, although I am glad you are here. The chapter is for Olympia and Adira. They will, in their own time, listen to this. I want them to hear it in my voice. Olympia, Adira. I am writing this in April of 2026. You are 8 and 2, respectively. You are asleep, both of you, in your rooms upstairs as I write. The dog is asleep on the floor next to my desk. Your father is asleep in our bed. The house is quiet. I have a candle on the desk that smells like the orange you ate at lunch. I want you to know, in case anybody ever tries to tell you otherwise, that the morning your mother and your father met was, in your mother's accounting, the most ordinary morning of her life. The morning was an Italian breakfast room with too much fruit on the table and too much sun in the windows. The morning had no music in it. The morning had no thunderclap. The morning had a tall, awkward man in earbuds at the next table who looked, to your mother, like nothing in particular. Most mornings of your mother's life had had thunderclaps in them. The morning of your father had not. That is, I want you to know how love comes. Love comes most often without a thunderclap. Love comes by way of a man at a table. Love comes by way of a rat that does not exist. I want you to know that your father is the man your mother had been waiting for. I will not tell you, in case you ever go looking for him, what your father looks like in the way the world looks at him. The world has its own opinions. The world will tell you, when you are old enough to read the magazines, that your father is a tech entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist, and a soccer club owner, and a number of other things. The world will be right. The world will not be telling you the part that matters. The part that matters is that your father is the man who got up at 4 a.m. to give you a bottle, so I could sleep. The part that matters is that your father packed your lunch. The part that matters is that your father drove your sister to school every morning he was in town for 9 years. The part that matters is that your father is the man who, when your mother is tired, makes oatmeal. The world does not know how to write that man down. The world is, in your mother's experience, frequently bad at writing the most important men down. I want you to know that the marriage you are growing up inside is not, in any way, the only kind of marriage. There are many kinds of marriages. There are good marriages that do not look anything like this. There are good marriages that have 1 parent, or 3 parents, or none. There are good marriages where the man is the louder one, and the woman is the quieter one. There are good marriages where there are no men. There are good marriages where there are no women. There are good marriages everywhere on this earth. I do not want you to think, because you are the daughters of a particular marriage, that your marriage, when it comes, has to look like this. Your marriage will look like yours. Your marriage will be made of your decisions. The decisions are yours. I want you to know that the only thing I wish for the two of you, more than any other thing, is that you grow up to be women who know how to be witnessed. The world will not, for the first half of your lives, witness you. The world will look at the photographs of your mother on a tennis court. The world will write about the photographs, the stories the world wants to write. The world will not see the small Tuesdays. The small Tuesdays are where the witnessing has to come from. The witnessing has to come from your father, from me, from your sister, from eventually the partners you choose. The partners you choose, if you choose well, will be the witnesses of your Tuesdays. The Saturdays will take care of themselves. I want you to know that the woman who is writing this to you was, on a morning in a hotel in Rome in 2015, 23 grand slams into a career that had, on paper, given her every conceivable thing a woman could want. The woman who is writing this to you had, at that time, no children, no husband, no kitchen, no dog, and no soccer club in North Wales. The woman who is writing this to you had everything the world had told her she should want, and the woman knew, on the morning of the rat, that the world had not told her the most important things. The most important things had been waiting for her. The most important things had been at the next table. I want you to know that love is hard. I am writing this on a Saturday at 1 a.m. because my daughter Adira had a bad dream and woke up, and I went to her room and I sat with her until she went back to sleep, and then I did not feel like going back to sleep myself. So I came down to the kitchen and lit a candle and started writing. Love is hard. The hardness is the love. The love asks of you the hardness, in the same way a tennis match asks of you the body. You go to the body because the body is the only currency the match accepts. You go to the hardness because the hardness is the only currency the love accepts. I want you to know, in the next sentence, that love is worth it. The years your father and I have spent showing up for each other have been the years that have given me the two of you. The years your father and I have spent showing up for each other have given me also my second half. My first half was tennis. My second half is the kitchen. The kitchen is, by every measure, the better half. The kitchen is the half I would not give back. The kitchen is what your father and I have been building. The kitchen is, by way of you and your sister, what your father and I have been giving each other. I want you to know, finally, that love stays. Your father and I have decided to stay. We decide every morning. We will keep deciding. There is, I want you to understand, a small upstairs room of your own self that you will, at some point, walk into. You will, in that room, decide what you will be. You will decide whether you will, in your turn, be a woman who stays. The decision is yours. I love you. Your father loves you. The kitchen loves you. The dog loves you. The candle has burned down. I am going to bed. Mom. Epilogue. On a porch, April 2026. We are sitting on a porch in Florida. The sun is going down over the dock. The two daughters are inside the house. The older one is reading. The younger one is asleep on a blanket. The dog is between us. The dog has been between us for 9 years. Serena. I will tell you what I think about when I think about us. I think about a breakfast room in Rome and a man who did not move when I told him there was a rat under his table. I think about the third night of the French Open. I think about a hospital in West Palm Beach. I think about a wedding in New Orleans. I think about a Met Gala in New York. I think about a dance floor in our living room. I think about all the small things, the 11 minutes in the morning, the oatmeal, the lunch on the porch, the toothbrush in the same place every night. I think about how the small things have been the marriage. I think about how grateful I am. Alexis, I will tell you what I think about when I think about us. I think about my mother. I think about her hand on my shoulder in the driveway in Maryland. I think about the right girl. I think about a woman in a hotel in Italy who tried to scare me off. I think about the third night of the French Open. I think about a Sunday afternoon when an old coach picked up a phone in California. I think about the small upstairs room of my own self. I think about how the room has, by way of my wife, become a household. I think about how grateful I am. Serena, I want you to know one thing. I want you to know that I was not, before you, a woman who was waiting. I was a woman who was working. I had not, in my years on the tour, been a woman who was looking for a man. I had been a woman who was looking for the next match. The next match was the only thing I knew how to look for. The first time I looked at a man and saw, instead of a match, a marriage, was the morning at the breakfast table in Rome. I want you to know that the looking that morning was its own miracle. I did not have to be looking. I had been looking. I want to thank, in this epilogue, the small grace that put me on that table that morning. I do not know whose grace it was. I will tell you that I have, since, become a woman who believes there was a grace. Alexis, I want you to know one thing. I want you to know that I had been told by my mother that the right woman was not going to be the wrong woman in disguise. I had not, before Rome, found the right woman. I had been looking for her in places that are not where the right woman is. The right woman is, almost without exception, somewhere you are not expecting. The right woman is at the next table. The right woman is the one who scares you off because she is testing whether you will move. I want to thank, in this epilogue, my mother. I want to thank her for the sentence in the driveway. I want to thank her for the German. I want to thank her for the watch on my wrist. I want to thank her, in the end, for being the kind of mother whose son was ready to recognize the right woman when the right woman, in May of 2015, sat down at the next table. Serena, the dog has fallen asleep on my foot. The sun is gone. The mosquitoes are coming up off the lawn. Alexis, the candles are about to come on inside. The daughters are going to want bedtime stories. Serena, the marriage has been a kitchen. The marriage has been a hospital. The marriage has been a dance floor. The marriage has been a porch. The marriage has been every room in our life. Alexis, the marriage has been the only project of my life that has paid back exactly what I put into it, plus the children, plus the dog, plus the small extra grace that comes when two people decide to keep deciding. Serena and Alexis, we will tell you, for the listener, the thing that has, in our years, been the truest thing. We will say it at the same time, the way two people who have been married a long time have learned to say things. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. Good night. Author's note. This audiobook is a work of inspirational fiction. It is dramatized from the publicly shared record of the marriage of Serena Williams and Alexis Ohanian, including but not limited to interviews they have given, public essays they have written, social media posts they have published, the documentaries they have appeared in, and the books and articles in which they and their families have placed themselves in the public conversation. Specific life milestone events, including the date and place of their meeting in Rome in May of 2015, the venue and theme of their wedding in New Orleans on November 16th of 2017, the births of their daughters Olympia in September of 2017, and Adira River in August of 2023, the medical complications that followed Olympia's birth, the Vogue essay published in August of 2022, announcing the author's evolution away from professional tennis, the Met Gala appearance in May of 2023, and the public ownership of the Wrexham Association Football Club are drawn from the public record. Dialogue, interior monologue, and small private moments depicted within these scenes are imagined faithfully and inspired by what the couple has placed in the public record. No invented scandal, infidelity, abuse, or wrongdoing is depicted. Where the couple's children are referenced, only details the parents have themselves chosen to share publicly are included. This audiobook is offered in honor of Serena Williams and Alexis Ohanian and the marriage they have built, and is published as part of the Books by Barron Love Story series, which exists to celebrate real couples who have done the hard, daily work of staying. For the latest titles in the series, visit booksbybarron.com or the Books by Barron channel on YouTube.